done. So really, really happy to have Forrest and Sam here today. And Dan is president of the Ideas Marketing Club, as well as he works with us in the Maji Center, and he runs our podcasts. If you haven't listened, they're pretty darn good, so check them out. Let's do coffee. Take it away, Dan.
All right. So we're just going to get up and have some introductions here. Obviously, Cecile just said, I'm Dan.
I'm Forrest.
Sam.
And basically how this is going to go is I'm just going to treat this sort of kind of like a podcast episode. We're just going to go through, ask some questions. It's a very like informal style chat.
Fireside.
And start giant fire. And at the end, are you guys answering questions or?
Sure.
Okay, fair enough.
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, if we get there. So first off, just for anybody that doesn't know, can you guys give a semi-brief description of what Jobber is, what Jobber does?
Oh, you take this one.
Okay. Well, first of all, who has actually heard of Jobber before, by show of hands? Okay, most people. So yeah, I mean, we're a venture-backed startup company, founded and primarily headquartered here in Edmonton. We have an office in Toronto as well. We will probably spend most of the day talking about the business and building of the business. But the product is a business management platform for small home service companies. So if you own like a 5-person landscaping company or a 10-person maid service business, those kinds of companies that go to primarily a residential home, but maybe a commercial location to provide a service, those are our customers, and our software helps them quote and estimate, manage all of their job scheduling, keeping track with their teams in the field through our mobile app, invoicing and billing. We've got a payments product. So all of the stuff that a company or a small business like that would need to run a successful small company on a day-to-day basis. That's all the stuff our software takes care of for them, so that they look awesome to their customers.
Fair enough. So for the idea of Jobber, I always have a hard time believing that it was 4 a.m. one day and you're just like, that's a good idea, we should do that. Where did the idea of Jobber come from, or was it a progressive idea? Did you sort of start off one place and then through iterations you were like, oh, by the way, way over here on portion E, we found out that it was good even though you started on A?
Well, I'd say the idea of Jobber in terms of developing software to help this segment of customers with their operations has never actually changed. We've been lucky; we haven't had to pivot. Developing software to actually accomplish that goal, we've had a lot of learnings on that front. And really, a lot of it came from back when we were both freelance developers. You work out coffee shops, one coffee at a time is how you pay your rent. And we kept running into each other. We didn't really know each other at the time. But you keep seeing each other at a coffee shop, you see code on somebody's screen, friendship starts to form. And Sam had been doing a little bit of work for a local business where, not really Jobber type work, but he got a chance to see inside their operations and see how manual and paper-based a lot of their work was. And he mentioned this to me one day, and I got really excited because just 2 weeks prior, a painting company that I knew in town had approached me wondering if I knew any software that would work for their business. So suddenly, he had this idea that he'd been sort of working on and thinking about, and when he mentioned it to me, it clicked with a conversation I'd had pretty recently. So we spent a weekend hacking away on it. And
Forrest was a way better software developer than me, so I was just happy to have the help.
It was joint effort, 50%.
But that Graham and his painting company became our first customer. And just a quick aside, Graham's painting company, who also did commercial coatings, this is sort of fast forward a few months, I think, was doing a job for a lawn care business, pesticide application business, where they were going to resurface the garage of their shop, and Graham was like putting the quote together on iPad, and the guys who ran this business were like, oh, that's really neat. I want that for my business, and they became a customer as well. And that guy's sitting right there, Mr. Toby Ramsden, which is pretty funny. Nice to see you.
Very cool, very cool. So that's so you guys met basically in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Then. That's so that moment, who made the first move then? Who walked over and was like, hey, that's some good looking code you got there.
That's a good question. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was over weeks or months. It was, complaining about the weather, like the little quips, and then it sort of grew to complaining about code over time. I don't think it was anything that precise.
Fair enough. So obviously, like, to get to the meat and potatoes of it, when you built the prototype, you said, hey, this is going to work. What was it like in the first, days of sort of taking it from, like, we've built this thing of, like, we're going to try and make money off this. Like, what did that look like? Was there, I'm sure there was turbulence, but I'm curious about, like, how you maneuvered that.
So that initial prototype was, still fair. Like, we still didn't have strong signals from the market. Like, we weren't all in, everybody quit your jobs, let's do this. It was like, hey, there seems like something here that we could, let's do evenings, weekends, develop this project. Our original idea, like off that first meeting, was if this could get to $8,000 of monthly revenue, like 3 for him, 3 for me, 1,000 for the servers, 1,000 for marketing, that would be like a really nice, side hustle to augment our real day jobs. So the product didn't even work. All the buttons, or most of it, was smoke and mirrors. It was enough to show the vision that we had in mind, and we just started reaching out to local businesses. And Edmonton businesses are just fantastic. I like to think businesses everywhere are fantastic, but it's like, we don't have a product to sell. It doesn't even work yet, but we're developing some software for businesses like yours. And if you just had 10 minutes to sit down and chat, I'd love to show you what we're working on. Just hear your thoughts if we're moving in the right direction. And we got a lot of great conversations from that. And each time you'd end it with, so would you use this for your business? And they'd always say no, but tell you why. And then we take that feedback and incorporate it into the prototype. And then it was months of doing this, months of getting doors slammed in our face when, that may sound far more brutal, but months of people saying no. Yes. That then Graham, as Sam said, who ended up becoming our first customer, we met him for lunch. He showed it to him, asked some questions, and he said, cool, when can I start using it for my business? And it didn't work yet, and we panicked. But after we said 3 weeks, and then we spent probably about 4 weeks heads down, just doing nothing but working on it, and managed to get something in his hands for his business.
Very cool.
Even then, though, like, I think it was, we got our first customer. That's huge. I think when you're and probably talk about fundraising a little bit, but I remember when we first were talking to Boris Wirtz, one of our early stage investors, the way that he explained sort of like his continuum of investment desire was like, is there, like, do you have a customer? Is somebody paying for this? And it didn't matter like what they were paying. Like, I think at the time when we first sort of put the site up, I think it was like $9. We didn't even have the infrastructure in place to collect $9. We just put the number on the website. But the difference between sort of like one paying customer and 0 paying customers is way more significant than the difference between one paying customer and 1,000. Same can be said of like revenue or dollars being collected, and then engagement as well is also huge. Like, are people actually using it? So even in those early days, like, I think we got that first customer, which is, in retrospect, I don't think we really recognized at the time how significant that was, but with the benefit of hindsight, getting that first customer was pivotal for the future of the business. But we remained blissfully naive for a long time after that, in terms of just how big the thing can be. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, we're a little smarter about it today, but I think we still very much have the attitude that we're just getting started and have barely scratched the surface of what this thing can be. But at the time, yeah, we I think up to, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 customers still thought like, oh, if we could just make like, $5,000 or $10,000 a month, we could pay ourselves. And it took a while. It took like actually a pivotal meeting with somebody that Forrest knew to kind of rattle our cage a little bit in terms of thinking properly about how to build a business versus how to screw around on a hobby project.
Yeah, sure. And it's worth knowing that once we got that first customer, it still took months and months and months of, a bunch more doors getting slammed in our face before we managed to get to customer number 2, and then months more for customer number 3. You sort of get in your head that the product's not ready, and then it is ready, but it was like, it was ready for one customer, but it wasn't ready for the market yet. It still took a lot of more hustling and a lot more iterating and adjusting just to get to number two. You know, that first one's the hardest, but it's, you know, the starting pistol and not the end of the race.
So in terms of your platform, in that whole time frame, was there times where you were developing like certain portions of the platform and both of you looked at each other and like, this is a good idea, and then you gave it to the customer and they're like, I don't want this, or like, this isn't.
95% of it.
Really?
Still happens today.
Yeah.
And then, so in those moments, is it just like, is it rapid iteration of like, okay, it didn't work, like move on, let's go find the thing that's wrong with it, or like, how do you approach those situations?
Yeah, I mean, all our customers had our personal cell phone numbers and would call us all hours of the day. So a lot of, you know, you'll replace bad stuff with good stuff very quickly when bad stuff gets you woken up at 2 a.m.
Yeah, Toby let us know.
Fair enough. So software is a super competitive business, obviously. Like it's you know, everybody, there's been multiple bubbles. There's been, you know, everybody dreams of being the big software in Silicon Valley. Were you guys ever like hesitant in your journey of like, geez, like software is, you know, not a terrifying thing, but it is something that is like quite daunting to take on? Or what? I mean, you mentioned you were blissfully naive. Was it just grabbing the bull by the horns and going, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever had any doubt in our minds that technology was not the future. And I still don't today. Like, I don't think there's ever been, I mean, it's easy to conflate sort of, you know, software as technology, but I mean, you can rewind as far back in history as you want, and like technology has always been the thing that sort of, you know, pushes sort of like humanity forward and sort of, you know, translates or pushes the productivity curve out so that, you know, people can do more with their resources. So I don't like, I think the answer is no. But then the second question is like, is our software and technology the same thing? Which I think is maybe less clear. I think as software becomes ubiquitous, it kind of disappears into the background a little bit. We don't really think about software. You would hardly realize that this very realistic fireplace is being run by a bunch of software. Like it's just like the microphones, like everything is really controlled. These are probably like computer controlled lighting systems. So I think like software is pretty much ubiquitous. Technology continues to evolve, and I think our job now as a company that is you know, sort of at sort of some initial stage of scale is to just make sure that we're continuing to look at and rethink like what is technology in the context of the product that we're delivering to market. Forrest spends most of his time thinking about that stuff now, and you know, because what we have, like the product's never done, right? Like we're a product company. Our commitment is to deliver and continue to deliver a product to market that's delivering value and helping to make our customers more successful. We're not gonna do that with like the scheduling system that we built in 2011 and put out to market. Like that's the code that Forrest originally wrote and that I originally wrote has churned out of our code base multiple times by developers on staff who are far more talented than Forrest and I ever were. But we need to be thinking about what's the next sort of you know, phase in either technology development or, you know, consumer expectations, and kind of stay ahead of that. So yeah, no doubt in my mind that like it's not a fad or anything. Like technology in some capacity is always going to be the thing that's kind of pushing the wavefront forward. And whether that's like software the way that we currently understand it or not is maybe a second question.
You also asked about like just the competitiveness of the space, and I don't think that's ever been a real issue for us. I mean, of course we keep an eye on competitors, but the reality is when we got started, it was a very nascent market, and like as we said earlier, we didn't set off to like conquer the world. We just wanted to solve people's problems, and we started by seeing a couple businesses and solving their problems, and then we thought that we might be able to take that tool and solve other people's problems, and before you know it, like you start off with the goal of solving problems and you end up with a business, and then like as you go through that transition, you start realizing just how big the market is, and like the best way to really approach the space and have that impact that you want. You need marketing teams and sales teams. You need tech support. You need like more engineers to keep scaling things up. You need designers. You need to bring in the next new set of features where you take the foundation that you have and turn like, how do you create these multiplier effects based off once you already have the invoices? What are all the things you can do to help support these businesses even more? So as long as like we've been getting great signals from the customers, I don't think the competition has really ever been something that we stress about. We respect the competition a lot. We pay close attention because you never know, right? Like it'd be foolish to assume that we're smarter than everybody. They're equally smart. They're equally passionate, and it's very important that we are always studying not just our customers but market trends and other product companies and other pieces of software out there, and trying to bring the best practices and stay on top of what's working, seems to work, and what doesn't. But it's never been something that scared us.
I'll touch on just the issue of like a bubble quickly though, because I think there is definitely a history, obviously, in technology, sort of around the year 2000, bubble that burst there. Obviously, we saw another one in 2008, more sort of around financial instruments and real estate. People are sensitive about, these kinds of things. There's more dry powder in the investment world today. So venture capital, from sort of like angels and seed stage investors, but in particular, sort of growth stage VCs and private equity firms and large family offices. There's more money for companies out there to go get today than there's ever been in the history of technology investing. And that does create some bubble dynamics. And I think in particular, we're seeing that a lot in and around AI and machine learning. There's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of like really interesting products and values and things that are going to change the world. But there's far more sort of like artificial intelligence and machine learning written on a slide that's being presented to investors to raise money. And we'll probably see a lot of those companies go out of business in the years to come, and then some of them really flourish and actually go on to change the world. But really, actually, that's no different than any other sort of previous epoch of venture investing. That's the idea. It's a high volume, high risk situation, and the matriculation rate of companies from one stage to the next is there's a dramatic drop off. So I think we will see that, and I think there probably will be a little bit of hand waving about like, see, told you it was a bubble, but it's like that's like over and over what happens in venture capital.
It's 10 steps forward, 2 steps back, 10 steps forward, 2 steps back. Yeah.
Interesting. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Through your time at Jobber, I always love asking this to people who go on the podcast too. Was there a moment where you almost closed the doors? And if so, how'd you maneuver it? You don't have to go into detail, but I am always curious to hear like people approach fear differently, and especially when it's something that they've worked on for a few years. That it's the way people can maneuver that is always an interesting thing to hear, and that's why I ask.
I guess there were a few times where the money got a little.
I remember almost running out of money. Yeah, I don't think we would have closed the doors though. Like we didn't have money for the first 2 years or first almost 2 years it depends on what you count as money. We incorporated in October 2010, and we raised our first seed round of funding in February 2012. And in the intermittent time, sort of maybe like a handful of months prior to raising that first seed round, we took in a little bit of friends and family money. But it was, we were pretty accustomed to making no money and eating a lot of like ramen noodles and stuff. And so I think when we did run into this potential, I can't remember when it was. Was it between seed 1 and seed 2? Or seed 2 and seed 3? I think it was between seed 2.
I think we had about 8 or 9 employees at the time.
Yeah. So it would have been a tough situation to be in, but I don't think, speaking for myself, and I think for Forrest too, I don't think we were sort of at our wits' end or anything, or would have closed. Like we probably would have had to make some changes and dealt with some tough like resourcing questions, but would have kept charging forward.
So within that, in terms of like leading the startup as well, from like a leadership point of view. So on one side, you said, you know, money got tight. In those moments, because obviously, like as an entrepreneur, there is sort of a commonality and attitude where it's like, you know what, I can do this. Like I'm gonna go do the thing, and whether that's bullish in nature or you're just gonna do that, like you still do it. In terms of leading people behind you now, because there's suddenly this whole new dynamic of like managing employees. In those times, were you still did you communicate that to employees as well, where it's just like, full steam ahead, we're not fearing anything in the future, or?
I feel back then we weren't. We've always tried to run a very transparent organization. Like learning how to do that effectively is you learn like everything else. So I think nowadays, like everybody at Jobber knows how much money's in the bank, knows what our burn rate is. Like, we try and be very transparent with these things. I don't think people realized at the time just how tight we got to not making payroll. But that was less because we were trying to keep it secret and more like we just hadn't really developed a strong muscle for like making sure we were sharing the most important things. In terms of trying to lead and charge forward, I think we've always tried to be really, transparent about the direction we're going and why we're going there and why we see it as an opportunity. I remember the saying, like the trick isn't to tell people to, pick up driftwood and make a boat. It's to make them yearn for the ocean. And we've always tried to show them the opportunity and let them make their own best decisions.
I'm going to say my follow-up question to that would have been like, have you seen fruits of that transparent model through your employees? Because I mean, at one point, you could see that people would say like, well, I have a problem with that. But I mean, if it sounds like you guys have seen fruits of that, which is very cool, because that is, in my mind, like a progressive business model to be very open door about it and say like, this is the direction, that's what's going on.
It should be noted, and everybody should remember that, like, we're a single data point. We can tell you what we did. We can't tell you if those were the best decisions or not. Yeah. And we can't tell you if those would work today for starting a business. If you want to start a business that looked exactly like ours for our exact customers 8 years ago, we can tell you how to do that. But, it's take everything we say with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah, there's an inherent survivorship bias to. There should be like a quick sort of aside about survivorship bias in front of every sort of talk like this, where there's like a company that's been successful, because
and 10 businesses could have done exactly like us, and 9 of them are out of business right now, and we were the lucky ones, and we wouldn't know that.
Yeah,
that's very humble of you. So I do want to ask a 2-part question, and I think it'd be cool if both of you answered individually though. What has been the hardest part about Jobber? And what has been the most rewarding?
Oh, you want me to go first?
I answered the last one first.
Okay, most rewarding is easy for me. I think that the thing I'm like most proud of about the company is the strength of the organization that we've built. We talk internally quite a lot about sort of organization building and the difference between building an organization and building a business. Two are very closely related, but they're not the same thing. And I think that a really great organization is something that people are really proud of being a part of, and they're motivated and care about what they're contributing towards. And I think we have that at Jobber, which is pretty unique. And there's I'm not going to give out the secret sauce necessarily, but a big part of it is speaks to sort of what Forrest was talking about earlier. People are they yearn for the sea. There's definitely an intrinsic motivation and a connection to our customers and the thing that we're doing for them. And people really care about that, and as a result, it translates back into caring about the organization that's being built. And as we add people and as we add functions and as we fall over because we grew too big and we need to learn how to do really regular things again, people really rally together and support one another. And I think that's how we'll be successful going from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800. Like every time a company doubles, the possibility of extinction is pretty high, just because everything breaks. And when you're growing really fast like that, you need everybody contributing to the growth of the organization. And I think if you get that right, then the likelihood of a successful business also forming is very high. The reverse is not always true, and actually mostly isn't true. There's lots of examples of wildly successful businesses out there. So, some of them in the press very regularly, and in particular in sort of technology and startups that are just absolute dumpster fire organizational. Like, it's just like not, like you can have a really successful business and be a place that people are just embarrassed to be a part of rather than really motivated. So I think that's a really long way of explaining that I think the organization and the strength of the organization and the culture that everybody has kind of come together to develop is really a point of pride. So that's my answer to that side of it. The hardest thing is, God, I think for me personally, one of the hardest things have been this is probably similar for Forrest. It's easier that I go first, actually, because you probably have the same answers. Sort of like leveling up as sort of like a coffee shop software developer to like a salesperson to a customer support person to like a marketer, marketing campaign designer to like a manager to a just executive. Like the path to CEO and CTO is a really sort of like jagged, weird path where you're constantly having to figure out how to not do the things that you were doing before. And it gets to the point where it's almost ridiculous how you don't get to get good at anything anymore. You like Forrest and I have done now, we haven't done every job in the organization. We've got very specific roles that we hire for, but up until not that long ago, maybe up until 50 or 60 people, we'd done between the two of us, every single job in the company. And now, like, sometimes we have conversations where it's like not perfectly clear what our job is.
It's the imposter syndrome is very real.
Yeah, it's really sort of abstract in a lot of ways, but it's also changing really dramatically. CEO and CTO of a 25-person company is very different than a 50-person company. And then as we grew from 50 to 100, we had to like learn that all over again, and we'll have to do the same thing as we push to 200. So. That's, I think, the hardest thing for me.
I'll answer them in reverse order so I can continue to play off that theme, because that was very much the first thought that came to mind, that like that transition from like doing the jobs directly to running the business to now we don't even get to run the business. We get to pick the people who run the business. Like we're picking managers who hire the people who are doing the job, and it's just everybody's here because you love learning, you want to keep growing, and that's great. And I think that's a big motivator for us. But it's drinking from a fire hose. You don't get to choose how fast you're learning in this case, and it's can be overwhelming. But because he said that, I'll actually give you a second one that sort of like the emotional roller coaster of like doing a startup is super challenging. It wears you down. When things are going well, they're going really well. But when things are going badly, it is just a terrible, terrible feeling. And I think we've been very lucky that we had this very effective relationship where usually we weren't both on a downswing at the same time. And when one person was, just having a really rough couple weeks, the other person could help pump them up. I could not imagine trying to do this solo. So if any of you ever decide you want to try going for a startup, I'd recommend finding a co-founder that you can trust and you have that alignment with. Do your homework. There's, because that relationship with the co-founder is so important, it's very easy for that to sink a company as well. So make sure that it has the secret sauce. But I'd say that those emotional roller coasters are sort of cliche, but it is very true. There's a reason that cliche exists. In terms of the positives, similarly, the team and the people we get to work with is just amazing. A founder's only real job is to hire people a lot smarter than you and stay out of the way, right? You're the only person who didn't have to get interview and compete to get your job, right? It's I had no competition for the CTO role. Everybody else had to earn their position. So we should be the least competent people in the company by design, right? And if somebody's coming in and doing a less good job than we could do, what are they there for? We can just go do that ourselves. Like, we bring people in to be smarter than us, have better ideas, see better strategy, think about through execution. Just everything should be better. And most people, when you join a group of people, you join a company, you look at a few companies, you choose the one that seems most compatible. We have been so fortunate to have the very rare opportunity to pick everybody around us. We actually got to design our perfect work environment and the people that we want to show up and learn from every day. And that's just been a really, rare and amazing opportunity. And that's what gets me so excited to get up and come to work each day, is the people I get to work with.
And it's worth mentioning that, like, we have in Edmonton, and I mean, we have an office in Toronto now too, but and so I would say this about the entire company, but particularly in Edmonton, we have a world-class team. Like, we have venture investors from all over the world who are invested in a lot of other companies, many of which would sound very familiar. And in all of the hotbed geos for tech, so like Boston, New York, San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, we have a team that competes on that level in Edmonton, which I think is important to point out, because I think there tends to be a little bit of a bit of a self-perception problem in places like Edmonton, not just Edmonton, but places like Edmonton. That should probably not be the case. We need to be a little more proud of what we're capable of. And I think there's a misquoted, there's a quote that I think was misattributed to C.S. Lewis about humility being sort of not, and I'm probably going to mess it up now, but it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So it's fine to be confident and really proud and even aggressive in that, but the end that it's in service to just needs to be something else other than self-flagellation.
I could feel the humility just radiating off you guys. That sounds really cool. The leadership model and the way you guys approach the company sounds fantastic. And I would agree on the Edmonton point. I think I don't know if you guys have seen those shirts that say still in Edmonton. I hate those shirts because I'm like, no, Edmonton's a cool place. Yeah, you're not still in Edmonton. Anyways, as on an individual level as well, did you guys ever know or call yourselves entrepreneurs? Was there you sound, so you're in freelance starting, which obviously takes a level of, entrepreneurship, even if not addressed as that. But did you guys ever call yourselves entrepreneurs? Or you're just we're going to start this thing and, oh, look at that, we're business owners.
Yeah, that's how it was for me. I didn't really go into it fancying myself an entrepreneur. Now I can concede the point. I guess we're entrepreneurs, but it wasn't all right, I'm an entrepreneur, now I'm going to go find a business to build. It was we just fell into this thing, started building this business, ended up meeting Forrest. Things just sort of happened one after the other, and before we knew it, we're sitting at Nate giving a fireside chat.
Agree completely.
Yeah, fair enough. So do you guys have advice for people who are starting out, whether that be on the beginning of the spectrum of you're kicking around an idea, or all the way to the point of I've fleshed this thing out, I've put it through a canvas 5 times, I've rinsed it. Are there any pieces of advice? It sounds like you've dropped about 2 mystical quotes on us that, speak a lot. So if you want to chime in on those.
I feel we could be up here all day talking about any one piece of advice. I think you've seen that Sam and I will bounce an idea around. We could go all day on any one of your questions. I think the thing that we sort of stumbled into early on, but is now and Sam talked about how important it is a couple times. He's made reference to organizational health, right? And if you're starting off a business, just being really deliberate, right? Culture doesn't happen by mistake. Having a great group of people doesn't happen by mistake. And it's very tempting early on, you take who you can get for cheap, or you take somebody who just seems absolutely brilliant. And, culture and the people and the environment are often like the afterthought. And in some ways, they kind of have to be. You're just trying to keep the lights on. But those things are so important to be able to turn, 1 into 2 and 2 into 4 and hit any kind of scaling and make an environment where you can focus on hiring new people instead of not having to replace the old people that keep leaving just because it's not a fun place to work and not a place where people feel that they're having the impact they want. Organizational health is so important, and I think it really probably took a little time for it to go from something that it was sort of intuitive and felt like something we should just be doing to something that we were being deliberate and calculated and measured on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and codifying it. Like I think we did, yeah, we had up until 15 or 20 people. Like I think we got lucky, I think is what happened. Like we really got like a good initial group of people who were sort of implicitly aligned on some of the things that we thought were important about what we were doing, and we were able to make a lot of progress, both organizationally and as a business. But yeah, we got to a place where thankfully it wasn't too late, where we actually sort of codified those things and made sure that we were building that stuff into the organizational cadence. So how we hire, how we think about recruiting, how we do performance management, how we have tough conversations with each other, and just be candid about feedback. And like I think one of the things that is interesting about startups is there's all of this, like, I don't know if you've seen the Silicon Valley TV show or any of the other sort of like memes basically about what it means to be a startup. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your company, like that stuff it's hard to watch that show because sometimes it does like hit a little too close to home. But the reason is because if those things are true, like the memes are true about your company, there's a problem. Like if for whatever reason, you go into work one day and it's like, oh shit, like our like culture really is about ping pong and beer on tap, then you're screwed. Like that is not a good reason to exist as a business. And like nobody is going to, like, that's fun and it's all great to be able to have those things, and you can have those things if you have like a good organization that is built on a foundation of like real like I think like the answer to the question, like why do we exist as a company or as a business, is an important one for companies to ask themselves as early as possible in their development. And if the answer to that question is ever like to hang out and have fun and play foosball and drink beer, then like find a new reason really fast.
I'd say it's tough because there's so many different stages that we've been through now. So like most of our advice seems to be around, once you start having a few employees, and another one I have for that point, I'm trying to think of ones that like apply before you even have your first employee, like just getting off the ground. But in terms of once you start getting employees, something that I've seen sink a lot of businesses under, I don't know if we do things right, but I've definitely seen other companies do this wrong, is that transition that Sam and I talked about, like the learning and letting go and pushing things off. It's really easy to micromanage, right? If this thing starts growing, it starts exploding, it feels out of control, you're tempted to try and stay involved in everything, still do everything, still be micromanaging and telling people where to go. And that transition to, trusting other people is really, really challenging. And eventually, you should be the last person to know anything going on in the organization. That's fine. It feels really, really uncomfortable. So you just have to accept that. I can't give you any advice to make it feel less bad, but know that that's how it's supposed to feel. And eventually you'll get used to that feeling. And it's the only way to go from a few employees to more than a few employees, because things will start happening so fast that you can't possibly keep up. And I've definitely seen founders not able to make that transition and cripple their organization because nothing gets done.
Yeah, the death hug.
Yeah.
I think make money is probably a good piece of advice. Like, I think if you're starting a business, And like this doesn't apply to, if you've got a really neat idea for something that is sort of more around like fundamental scientific research, or and even in computer science, you're doing something AI, ML related. But I mean, if you're building a business, like make money as soon as you possibly can. Like get market validation. Find a customer who will agree to pay you money for the thing that you are building. Like as fast as you possibly can, get to a place where you are validated that you are creating value and delivering that value. Because if you aren't doing that, then you don't deserve to charge anybody money. Like you should have a relationship with your customers that is sort of like mutually beneficial. And I think like a lot of us included, like we waited a long time to start trying to. Not a long time, but like if I were doing it again, I would start trying to sell the product earlier than we did. And that like exists in a lot of different forms. Like you can build, we did build a lot of smoke and mirrors where it was kind of like not everything really works, but what do you think? How does it look? But then we went and we built a bunch of stuff, and we just didn't really put a lot of effort behind selling account number 2 and 3 and 30 and 300. So I think that's like a really important thing to do as early as possible, because you can also invalidate your thing and prevent yourself from wasting a lot of time.
Game paid in blockchain tokens does not count as game paid. A lot of startups doing that.
Not going to get into that.
You're kidding. You mentioned the death hug.
Oh yeah.
That what is that?
Well, so Forrest is describing this thing that no founder wants to kill their company because they're mismanaging or overmanaging it. They just think that they need to help, and it's really difficult to let go and just like let people exercise autonomy over the area of the business that they're taking care of. And they're going to make mistakes, right? They're absolutely going to do things differently than you would, and because they did those things, a shitty result might occur that you would otherwise be able to avoid if you just did it yourself. But that's I think good leadership and good management is about turning that into a learning opportunity to make sure that person, we can sort of like unpack what happened, acknowledge it, support the fact that this is like actually good news. Like we're never gonna like have to deal with this particular set of circumstances again. And you're building somebody's like capability to do it on their own. And so if you approach it like I'm going to get in over here and avoid and help this person avoid this problem, I'm going to get over here and like get in this person's way, like you're essentially giving your business a death hug, because you care so much. You're not doing it because you want to kill your business. You're doing it because you love your business and you want to see it succeed. But it's kind of counterintuitive what actually happens when you do that.
Yeah, it's
the death hug.
Yeah, with pretty much any decision, you just map it on a 2x2 matrix if you want to. Like, how much is like the right decision or the wrong decision on this? Like, what's the cost or impact to the business? And more importantly, how confident are you that involving yourself is actually going to result in a better outcome? Like, you actually have more information and more capabilities than the people looking at it now. And often the answer is no to that. You just have another set of eyes and another set of opinions. Maybe you do things differently, but you actually aren't necessarily going to do it any better. And you should only be getting involved on things that you actually have a creative value to the project or decision, and it's going to be really impactful to the business. Because if you're not adding something, why are you involving yourself? If it's not expensive, that's not where you need to be spending your time. The worst that happens is the team gets it wrong, they learn from it, they fix it, and then they move on. But it's a distraction, so you have to sort of try and keep yourself in that one top right quadrant and avoid everything else. That was from, I wish I remember too, it was one of those Stanford Business School talks where one of the execs got up and laid that out.
So before we get to the question period, just the last final thing, where is Jobber headed?
Up and to the right.
Yeah, well, I'll put it this way. I mean, we can't really, obviously there's not a lot in terms of sort of business statistics that we can share, but Jobber today is about 125 people between Edmonton and Toronto. We have customers in 35 countries. This year, our customers will deliver in excess of $4 billion worth of services to their customers. And we currently have 0% of the market in North America. 0% of the customers that or the businesses that could use Jobber are currently using Jobber. So we built a meaningfully sized business right now, and it's like, and I think like we want to spend as little much or as little, we want to spend as little time as possible, congratulating ourselves on sort of like, what we have today, because really it is just scratching the surface. All of the opportunity is in front of us, and there's no reason that if we do this right, that we shouldn't build like a $1 billion business, like a Shopify-sized company or larger.
It's I think one thing in terms of the future that we often talk about and emphasize with employees, again, we're very passionate about our customer base. The one thing that we're not going to do is how do we take our technologies and our tool and now make scheduling for lawyers and now make scheduling for accountants and just start moving from industry to industry. We're not going to try and go up. It's like, can this work for large telcos? I think we're going to always be very focused on this set of customers, and as we continue to grow and succeed with our first product, be looking for additional ways we can leverage technology to help support their businesses. There are, a million problems that every one of these entrepreneurs has, and let's see what other ways we can, what other problems we can solve for them.
Yeah, but super focused on small business, really passionate about small business.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So we'll open it up for questions just to make sure we're not running out of time here. Just try to keep your questions shorter than mine, obviously. But yeah, we can take a few if anybody is curious. Go for it.
We get to pick who we want?
Yeah, you guys go.
Okay. I think that was the first one back there.
So just in terms of that early stage, the seed stage investment, did you guys tap into local networks here, or did you guys go straight to the valley for those initial stages?
So we actually, neither. We actually raised our seed investment came from two groups, one out of Vancouver and one out of Berlin, Germany. The way that came together was a combination of just like weird luck and happenstance. I think that we were pretty naive at the time, didn't fully understand what the investment environment looked like here locally, if it existed really at all. I think the question of money is like oftentimes gets chalked up to like, oh, we just don't have it here. But I think that's BS, frankly. Like, I think if you have a really good like business, like the start to a really good business, you've got and like having an idea these days isn't enough. Like you need like a product, at least like a shadow of a product and some kind of market validation commitment from your first customer, and then like a business model around it, like a pro forma financial, essentially. And if you have that and it's compelling, like you can raise money from anywhere in the world. Most venture capital investors, like the tier one VCs, are still like a little bit in their own backyard, but a lot of tier one, and then in particular the rest of the group are very happy to invest outside of the Valley, Boston, New York these days. And in particular, if I'm a US-based investor and I'm looking at like a company, and this is something that we need to think about a lot more as Canadian companies. If I'm looking at a company in the US and a company in Canada that are doing the same or have the same idea or doing the same thing, maybe for all intents and purposes have the same amount of promise, I'm going to invest in the Canadian company every single time because I get at least right now, a 30% premium on the dollar. And then we've got all this like non-dilutive funding coming through the government through programs like SHRED and IRAP. So you can really amplify those early investments that way. And that's something like some US investors are naive to that kind of thing, so you should bring it up. But yeah, no, we ended up with investors in Vancouver and Berlin.
Sam actually alluded to it a little bit earlier, that from starting the company to making that first raise, you start by using your savings, and then you're using your credit cards, And then we did have to go to the bank of mom and dad, right? Like that's a bit of a rite of passage for a lot of founders. And it's like, you don't feel good doing that, but it is like, something that a lot of entrepreneurs have to do. It's, I actually think a lot of VCs like view it as valuable because they know that once they invest, if you already have investment from family and your family has shares, you're going to be treating their money like you're treating your family's money. Now, again, there's that survivorship bias. You take money from family and the company folds, you just lost your family's money. But we were at the point where our family was going to have to pay our rent anyways.
Yeah, and it wasn't a lot. Like it was not, I mean, to put it in, we're talking about like 10 grand. So it's not a, because I have somewhat different thoughts. Like I think raising from family is like, can be dicey, can create weird dynamics. But anyway.
It's definitely weird, but lots of founders have to do it.
Yeah. I think there was one over here.
Yeah, you guys gave some advice for starting a business. I was wondering if you guys gave some advice for developers.
Developers like starting a business or?
Just software developers just trying to get a job. Since you guys started just as developers, right? And you guys just started a business?
Yep.
Like, is there anything you wish you knew before you even started a business as developers?
So are you looking for advice like for a developer that wants to be an entrepreneur or a developer that wants to get a job at like a company like Jobber?
Trying to get a job at Jobber.
Okay. Yeah, just like I guess childhood interests, and to tie into this question, and Forrest is going to be the better answer, but for me, yeah, I mean, I just was always interested in technology. I was always like getting in trouble taking apart my parents' VCRs and whatever I could get my hands on. And then when we got our first computer, that sort of translated naturally to programming because that was something that like was harder to break anything. Although then I took the computer apart. But I think that for me, like that kind of sort of like natural interest, like I think if I shifted the time frame and that was sort of like later in history and I was our friend over here like thinking about working somewhere, I think that you gotta do stuff. You gotta like work on projects, work on open source stuff, start building a GitHub profile, like put yourself in a situation where like you're making it really easy for people to see that you're passionate about something. And it doesn't have to be like the thing that a company does specifically. Like we're a Ruby on Rails shop. Like we don't really care, I don't think, whether or not you're a Ruby on Rails expert. We care that you that you're really interested in building products and delivering value and just technology in general. And so yeah, I think just like building I guess it's a portfolio, the software developer equivalent of a portfolio.
It's I assume you're a student now looking for like that first job type thing, or do you have a bit of experience?
There's a few of us in this room that are in capstone like next semester, and so we'll be getting out in the job market early summer.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I mean, the portfolio is a huge thing. There's a lot of people think there's a lot of focus on like learning the specific languages that industry uses, but the reality is that the technologies that we use at Jobber are going to change so much. Like every couple of years, we have a new framework, a new language. Like everything's changing so rapidly that part of your career you're expected to be able to learn new languages. Otherwise, you'll graduate in 2 years from now, you'll be useless, right? You have to be able to keep learning and growing. So I actually don't care what languages you know. We actually don't really care what your degree is. Like we do a technical interview to make sure you're bringing the skills that we need to bear. We care a lot more about like a lot of that passion and experience, going out, pursuing things, side projects. We're really, something that they don't talk about enough is like the team experience, like go be part of like clubs, get involved in larger open source projects, learn to write code with other people. Often in school, they teach you very short-term skills, like you develop something from scratch. You're not having to pick up somebody's old legacy code and try and carry it to the next thing. If it works for the assignment, a lot of those code standards and quality are often sort of afterthoughts. But at Jobber, it's like, every line of code has to go through a code review, either from your peer or you're reviewing for somebody else. and always has to be like clean, concise, well tested, maintainable, and those skills are often underappreciated. Lots of the soft skills are also around. So we have a career ladder for our developers, and that career ladder, actually, it's forks. You have the management track and individual contributor track. An individual contributor track is not less than managers. It's completely parallel. You can have a 20, 30-year career as a developer without ever having to be a manager. And I think that's really important. Not a lot of places have that, but often, the person who's best at writing code may not be the best with people and vice versa. And that's fine, and you shouldn't feel obligated to go do something that you don't like doing to continue to develop your career. So I'd look for that. But going back to where I started, a lot of the things along that career path are about the soft skills. Managing team dynamics, dealing with conflict. Like, these are the things that actually, the more projects you're on, the better you get, and those are actually what tend to be the big factors for success or failure. Right? I put a senior engineer on a project, I'm more confident that when people leave meetings, everybody's going to be on the same page. If the things start going a little sideways, we won't spend 2 months developing a bad idea before somebody finally raises their hand and says, I don't think this is the right idea. Like, if it feels like, somebody's falling behind on the project, the senior engineer often will sit down with them and maybe provide some extra support. Senior engineers are the ones who are in their free time experimenting with new technologies, bringing great ideas forward. So a lot of those soft skills are super important for your career development, and I do things that both develop those and show that you're thinking about those skills, because that's actually what we look for more in our interviewing than anything else. We can teach you code.
It's an interesting question. I mean, probably, well, for me, most of what I spend my time on is specific to the organization. So if I'm an organization of one, it's probably not as valuable. That said, I mean, I would certainly be more effective as a freelancer if I went back to it today than I was when I was doing it. Probably. Most of the reason why is due to just time management. Freelancing, time management when you're freelancing is a huge challenge, and I think I have to deal with that in a pretty major way now, and have for a number of years. I think that would probably make things a little easier. But
yeah, that's sort of similarly. My day-to-day aspects are not at all resembling my time as a freelancer, but just the experience and tactics around, better communication, how to run a good meeting, how to manage my time, those things that may not be our jobs versus freelancing. It might just be that we have 8 years more experience now than we did then in life, and those are life skills. Not usually. I didn't have kids then, so I got to sleep in on occasion. I haven't slept in a while.
All right, well, we'll cap it off at that, and let's give these guys a round of applause for a great talk.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, guys. It was really good.
Great,
Yeah,
and we'll be around if anybody has more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.